everyone. Welcome back to class 9. We are coming to finishing all the course. We have just 2 classes left. And I would like to remind you that the Venerable Gyelse is going to teach us one more thing. Not now, in May, in the retreat in Armenia. And Geshe Michael is teaching us, preparing us to Diamond Way. And Venerable Gyelse is teaching us this practice, purification practice, to delete all our obstacles to Diamond Way and to everything else. So this retreat is going to be in May. For 10 days, she will be teaching us, especially people who are closer, Europe, Russia, Ukraine, all other countries which are close. It's going to be in all the languages which people need. And you can get this practice because it needs empowerment, kind of permission to practice. So you need to be introduced to Vajrasattva, this angel who purifying us. So if you would like to delete your obstacles and get ready to going forward, then join us in this retreat. Please turn on your cameras, and Venerable Gyelse will be teaching us new ideas from different point of view today. Class 9 of ACI 15. Welcome, Venerable Gyelse. Thank you for teaching us. You're muted.
Hello, everyone. Here's my house behind me, all getting ready for the rest of the day today, my shopping bag and things. Maybe it's a little distracting and I could blur it so it's not so distracting. Let's see here. There we go. So as Kadrin said, we are on class 9 and we just have today and then Thursday. If you guys want to do a review, I suggest you guys do it together on this Zoom channel. You can all do a review together. I personally don't have the time to do a review with you at this time. I've got a lot of other things backing up that need my attention, so I'm sorry about that. And but hope that you have the time to review this course. For me, teaching this course is a review, which is very cool. So when you become a teacher, you get to review the courses and go deeper into them. And I think maybe as teachers, we profit a whole lot more than you do as students. And it's pretty cool. Continuing to learn and to integrate and use what we're teaching, what we're learning in our studies. And I look forward to all of you becoming teachers and doing that as well as we continue passing this on. Over 2,500 years, it's pretty cool, right? So it's a long class today and packed full, so I think we should just get on it and start, okay? Let me share my screen. There we go. And as we have been doing since the beginning of this class or this course, is thinking about why we're doing this. Why are we studying what Lord Buddha really meant? What is the purpose? Is it just to amass knowledge? Is it to be able to use what Lord Buddha taught in some way in our lives? And then in what way in our lives? So at the beginning of the class, we think about these things. What is it we're trying to do? Last night in Mixed Nuts, if you were there, Gyelse said, really the bottom line is bringing people, ourselves, our loved ones, and everyone to a place where they will no longer die, where we can beat death. And that is the paradise of a Buddha. So let's set that motivation deep in our hearts of creating this world where there are no wars, where there is no fighting between people, between partners, between families, people in the family, in the workplace, a place that is full of beauty and healthy, right? For every being. Here is the great earth, filled with a blanket, filled with the smell of incense, covered with a blanket of flowers. The great mountain, the four continents, wearing a jewel of the sun and moon. In my mind, I make them the paradise of a Buddha and offer it all to you. By this deed, may every living being experience the pure world. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I achieve enlightenment. By the power of the goodness that I do in listening and the rest, may I reach Buddhahood for the sake of every living being. I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha until I achieve enlightenment. By the power of the goodness that I do in learning and the rest, may I reach Buddhahood for the sake of every living being. I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I achieve enlightenment. By the power of the goodness that I do in giving and the rest, may I reach Buddhahood for the sake of every living being. Let that just sink in for a moment. So class 9. Class 9. A detailed presentation of emptiness according to the independent group of the Middle Way School. So that's what we're going to be doing today. The independent group, that's the Svatantrika, the Madhyamika Svatantrika, right? There are 2 branches of the Middle Way School. There's the independent group, and then there's what we call the consequence school, right? So today we're focusing mostly on the independent group. So you've graduated. You've graduated from mind only to middle way. Yay. And this word for the independent group, Svatantrika, it has nothing to do with Tantra, okay? It is the independent group of the middle way. And they have these special beliefs about emptiness which are somewhere between the mind-only school and the Madhyamika Prasangika, the consequence school. And apparently, to understand their presentation of emptiness helps you go from mind only to the highest presentation of emptiness. So it's like a bridge from mind only to the highest, ultimate, most subtle presentation of emptiness. The Prasangika or consequence school, which is the higher of the two Madhyamika schools, which we'll do next class, is the one that's used for Diamond Way also. It's that viewpoint. It's the ultimate one. So whether you're going to get enlightened in 75,000 or 76,000 countless eons or 77, or in the next 10 years or so, either way, you'd have to use Madhyamika presentation, right? The Madhyamika Prasangika presentation. That is the path that you need to do that to get enlightened. So this class is a bridge between those two. So a lot of stuff tonight. As I said, it's going to be a full class. So tie yourselves to your seats, put on your thinking cap. We're going to cover the whole idea of emptiness in one class. So Jason Kopp in his early years was very confused by the Madhyamika that he was presented with. He had the books from India, he had the lineages from India, but he wasn't satisfied. And he spent years trying to work out apparently contradictory explanations or confusing and unclear explanations. And it was mainly Lama Tsongkhapa who actually helped make the distinction between the Svatantrika and the Prasangika. Although all the schools, they do accept that idea and all the schools talk about it, still it was a little bit hard to figure out what do they believe. Because they are Madhyamikans, and it's a certain lineage that's split off of Madhyamika at a certain point. And that's why it's confusing. So Geshe Michael, in his kindness, went to the monastic textbooks, which are much more clear on this subject of the independent school. And so that's where you would go if you really want to understand it. Geshe thinks that we have to go beyond this presentation in the essence of eloquence. We have to go to the presentation that happened maybe 50 years later or 100 years later, or maybe even 200 years later. If you are trying to just read the sutra itself, you will be totally confused. Now, if you went through the Tangyur, you'd be only slightly less confused. What's the Tangyur? It's the Indian commentaries. So if you went to Lord Atisha's period, which is 1,000 years ago, that's very brief, and it's also confusing. It's only with Tsongkhapa and the first Dalai Lama and the great thinkers of that time that it really starts to get clarified. But as you know, even his language, Lama Tsongkhapa's language, is a little hard to really understand. So to really understand this subject well, we are going to the monastic textbooks. And Geshe-la put together a very beautiful collection of readings from the monastic textbooks on this school system. And we need all of them to understand this school's system. Cool? Hope so. So, the independent group, the lower group of the middle way school. Of all the groups, of all the schools, this one is the least defined, the least clear. It is the one that you can't really get clear information about in the scriptures. So Tsongkhapa was totally frustrated with this, and he went to Manjushri. You see Manjushri here? In the beginning, Lama Tsongkhapa couldn't see Manjushri or speak to him directly, but he was able to ask questions through his Lama, whose name was Umapa. So, because Lama Umapa had a direct connection with Manjushri. So Tsongkhapa would go to Umapa and ask Umapa questions like, please tell or convey to Manjushri that I don't understand this point about the Svatantrika, the Rangyupa. So like that. And then Umapa would ask Manjushri, and he'd give back the answer that at some point, he would give back the answer to Lama Tsongkhapa and he would understand it. In fact, at first, Tsongkhapa was very skeptical that Lama Umapa was really talking to Manjushri. And so he tested him with lots of questions. And it became very clear and apparent that he was really talking to Manjushri. And then, as these years went on, or months, I don't know how long it was, of Lama Tsongkhapa talking to Manjushri through Lama Umapa, Lama Tsongkhapa started to be able to see and communicate directly with Manjushri himself. So you can see here Manjushri and Lama Umapa with Manjushri, or Lama Tsongkhapa with Lama Umapa with Manjushri hovering over them. And in this picture, Lama Tsongkhapa is speaking directly with Manjushri. So the lower half of the Madhyamika school, this independent school that we're talking about, say that emptiness, but they don't call it emptiness. They say it can be divided into 3 degrees. And there's an idea that there's 3 degrees of what they call selflessness. So we have to be careful if we're going to take off our mind-only hat, right? Where you used to call emptiness what? What did we call it in mind only? You guys asleep in class? Totality. And the Tibetan word for it, the West Chinese word for it, Yongdrup. Everybody say Yongdrup. Yongdrup, totality. Okay, that was mind only. Let's take that hat off and put on our lower Madhyamika hat. Who say we do believe in emptiness, but that's only the highest of the 3 degrees of selflessness. Okay? So there's 3 degrees of selflessness, and only the highest one is ultimate emptiness, according to Madhyamika Svatantrika, the independent school. And under the certain conditions, the other lower 2 might get called emptiness, but it's not real emptiness. So what are these 3 degrees? Say Dakme Tra, Rak Sum. Dakme Tra, Rak Sum. Sum means 3, right? Dakme Tra means selflessness. Rak means subtle. So subtle gross, which means degrees. They take 2 opposite words to mean that. So 3 degrees of selflessness. So this division is unique to the independent school. The first one is Ganzaki Dakme Tramo. Say Ganzak, Gi, Dakme, Tramo. Ganzak is person. Dakme we know is selflessness. And Tramo means subtle. So this is the subtle lack of a self nature of persons. What does that mean? Well, let's get into it. This is the least subtle of the 3 degrees. This refers to the selflessness of a whole person, like the fact that there is no self to Venerable Gyelse. Min will get to it. Or it's contrasted to the selflessness of the parts of a person, which is presented in the next degrees. Gross here, trauma, means obvious or easy to perceive. Right? Or trauma, excuse me, is subtle. So it's the opposite of that. The gross. So gross means the obvious and easy to perceive lack of a self nature of a person. And because it's so obvious, they don't even include that idea here in one of the degrees of selflessness. And we'll talk about it later today. Now we're talking about the subtle lack of a self nature to people. We are going to talk about what it would be like if Min had a self nature. right? What would his subtle self nature be? And how is it different from his gross self nature? It's like Min said, there's no me. We're talking about it, right? What is the difference between his subtle and gross self nature if he had one? So this is theoretical. We're really talking about, imagine this, a 6-inch rabbit horn as opposed to a 12-inch rabbit horn. Do they exist, rabbit horns? Of course not. So he doesn't have a self nature. Remember, what does a self nature mean? Although we can imagine what they're talking about, one person has a wrong idea about emptiness and another person has another wrong idea about emptiness. Do the objects which their mind is grasping onto exist? Like a 6-inch horn on a rabbit and a 12-inch horn on a rabbit? No. But you can still describe the difference between two bad ideas. So we're going to go into this more deeply. We did talk about this gross lack of a self nature of persons. Tak chik wrong wanjengi dak. An independent self contained that's unchanging and whole. So this is what is being denied when we speak of the gross lack of a self. This gross self nature of a person doesn't even qualify, as I said, as something that we need to deny because it's so obviously non-existent. An independent self doesn't depend on anything else, doesn't depend on air, doesn't depend on water, doesn't depend on food, doesn't depend on others, unchanging, whole. Does that exist? No. So they don't even include it in their list. It's kind of like a child's idea of a soul, which many people in the Judeo-Christian world, Christians, Muslims, Jews, grew up with. This clear, eternal, unchanging soul that flies away and goes up to heaven when you die. Right? No matter what you did as a child, the soul was unchanged, even if you were super, super bad. It's always there. My essence, which never goes away. And that's a self. In Sanskrit, the word is Atman. And I don't know Sanskrit, but Geshe-la says when they mistranslate Atman as soul, he thinks this is what they're thinking of. This very not well thought of, kind of rough version of what a self means. So the real one is when you think of the cylinder as a pen and you think that the penness is part of the cylinder. That's the real meaning of it. So tak, which is short for takpa, means unchanging. Chik means one. Here, one whole compact thing, right? Tak chik. Rang wanchen means totally independent, something that can't be affected by causes and conditions. So this is the self that doesn't exist when you're talking about the gross or obvious lack of a self to people. So the fact that this kind of supposed self doesn't exist is called the gross lack of a self nature of persons. And this would be the self that carries around the 5 parts of a body, what they call the 5 heaps, pumposhi. Like the soul that contains but is independent from you, independent from your body and mind. Does this kind of self, has it ever existed? Will it ever exist? Does it exist now? Something that is independent, self-contained, unchanging. Are you an unchanging being? No, right? Doesn't exist, never will exist, and never did. When we are talking about self, doc is the word for self, it doesn't necessarily refer to a sentient being. It can also be applied to the parts of a person, like your hand, right? As in the lack of a self nature of objects. And this came about in scripture when Lord Buddha was talking about who carries the 5 heaps, the 5 parts to a person. And some people said there must be somebody independent of the 5 heaps. There must be a Gyelse independent of her body and mind. Because Lord Buddha said you have to carry these 5 heaps around. So, if that's the case, he must have meant that my essence is something different than the 5 heaps. I'm not my body. I'm not my mind. I'm not the combination of my body and mind. I'm some kind of eternal being who's loaded down with these 5 heaps. And Lord Buddha says, get rid of those 5 heaps, throw them off. So who's doing the throwing off? I must be something different. They misinterpreted something Lord Buddha said. So what about the subtle version of self-existent person? Does it exist? There's a big debate about whether one of the Abhidharma schools believe in that thing or not. There's a big debate about whether any Buddhist schools are, excuse me, are dumb enough to believe in a gross self nature of a person. and we'll talk about it. The second kind of self-nature is Chuki Dakme Rakpa, the gross lack of a self-nature of objects. And here objects means parts of a person. Parts as opposed to the whole person. And gross here is referring to just being harder to perceive than the last one. It's not talking about something that's yucky, not that kind of gross. So when you say selflessness of objects in the context of objects and people, it's talking about the parts of a person. You might think that when they say, well, there's Natasha's selflessness, and then there's the selflessness of all those objects, you could start thinking chairs, computers, stuff like that, right? That's not what object means here. It means their selflessness and then the selflessness of their parts. You know, we could whittle it down to two parts, body and mind, right? So you have to keep that in mind when we talk about the selflessness of people as opposed to the selflessness of things. Things is a code word in Buddhist philosophy for the parts of that person. And by the way, self is a really nasty translation because also self, as you know, always refers to people. You don't talk about the self of the chair or something like that. So it's a rather unsatisfactory word, but we're kind of stuck with it at the moment. And if you were to be talking to somebody in Tibetan and you said doc, it does refer to me or self. Right? So the third degree of subtlety is Chuki Dakme trauma. Right? We have Rakpa, which is gross, and then we have trauma, which is subtle. The subtle lack of a self nature of objects. What are we talking about? Person's parts, right? This one is the most difficult to perceive, and only the smartest independent school students can perceive it. This is the real, in quotes, right? Emptiness according to the independent school. They might use the term devoid of to describe the lower two selflessnesses. But they are not really degrees of emptiness. Chu, this word chu, in both of these means dharmas or things or objects. And it's a code word for what? For parts of a person. It's a code word for parts of a person. And so we're now talking about the trauma version, the subtle version. And this is equivalent to tompani, shunyata, emptiness in this school. The subtle lack of self to objects or the parts of a person is real emptiness in this school. You can describe the other ones by saying, oh, the emptiness or the voidness of a self-existent person, something like that. You're still using the word voidness, but it doesn't mean the same thing. It doesn't mean the highest or ultimate form of emptiness. In this school, you can talk about them as the voidness or absence of something like that. You're still using the same word in Tibetan, tongwa, but it doesn't mean emptiness. So be careful. Understand that. When they say tongwa or tompani in this school, it doesn't mean the same thing that Madhyamika Prasangika means. So let's go over it. The independent group divides selflessness into 3 degrees. Right? First is sort of easy to perceive. It is the lack of a self nature. The medium, a little harder, is the harder lack of a self nature. The medium hard lack of of a self nature, let's put it that way. And then there's the more difficult to perceive lack of a self nature. And that one's real emptiness, according to Madhyamika Svatantrika, the independent school. So let's consider 3 different people on this Zoom call. If they had 3 different spiritual capacities, all of them would get the first one. Only 2/3 of them would get the second one. And only the last third of them would get the last one. So they say, who's they? The independent school, there's 3 degrees of emptiness. There's 3 tonglongs, 3 paths of seeing. Interesting, huh? There's 3 direct perceptions of selflessness that these 3 different groups of people go through. There's 3 tracks, there's 5 paths on the first track. The first time they see selflessness. The second level of selflessness, there's 5 paths on the second track. And then there's 5 paths on the third track. They are all called 3 degrees of selflessness. You might wonder why not 3 degrees of emptiness? They don't think that the first 2 are really pure, real emptiness. So although you could say first level, quote, emptiness, and you'll see the word emptiness applied to the first level, the easier one, technically it's only the third one, which is true emptiness. In your reading, it says the three are actually contradictory. If something is first level selflessness, it cannot be second level selflessness. If something is second level selflessness, it cannot be true emptiness. So the first two levels of selflessness cannot be true emptiness. So yes, Madhyamika Svatantrika also agrees that nothing comes from itself. It's based on the lower schools, and we're getting more and more subtle. So these three tracks. And we're going to go back to the subtle self nature of persons. Okay. Three tracks, Tekpa Sum. Sum again is three, Tekpa, we'll say tracks here. It can also mean vehicle, like yana, and maha or hinayana. So what does it mean? What does track mean here? In your Buddhist career, you will travel along the 5 paths. You heard of the 5 paths? They're like attitudes or spiritual stages, realizations on that you will get on one or more of the 3 tracks. So there's 5 paths and 3 tracks. You can go to track number 1 in 5 steps or 5 stages. You can go to track number 2 in 5 stages or track number 3 in 5 stages. In this school. How many tracks then? 3 times 5. 15. They call them the 15 paths. And again, this is a code word for spiritual states of realization. So the first track, in the first track of the subtle lack of a self nature of persons, are the nyentu. Nyentu means listener. In Sanskrit, it's Shravaka. And this term refers to the fact that they can listen to the Mahayana teachings and teach them to other people, but they don't have the ability to put them into practice themselves. So they're just listening. Right? And sometimes this term doesn't always fit. This kind of thing happens when sweet, holy, diamond way teachings are taught, but a person is not mature enough to practice it. So you have to think carefully, am I mature enough to practice this? And you might tell your friends, oh, it was amazing, and I learned the diamond way. But when they get home, they just fall back to the open way teachings. And they're different. And of course, you don't know what they are until you learn them, right? So rather than working on a new way of seeing the world, they aren't spiritually mature enough yet to do that. still practice the old way of seeing the world. They can hear it, they can tell you what they learned, but they cannot practice it. And this is sometimes translated as hearers. And this is we're in track number 1, right? And then we have second group, tech men. Tech, as I said before, can be way or tracks, vehicle. Men means lower, the lower way. Sometimes this is referred to as Hinayana. Hina, even in Hindi, means small or inferior. And as I said, tech means lower, so tech men, lower way. We are not, let me make this very, very clear, we are not talking about Buddhism that's practiced in places like Burma, Sri Lanka, Thailand, right? It's not what we're talking about here. There are millions of people in those countries who are totally compassionate bodhisattva people. There's probably millions of us Mahayanists who haven't reached compassion yet. So we're talking about two different things here. We're saying that these people don't yet have bodhicitta. And it doesn't matter what country they live in. I have some very dear friends who are Hinayana monks, and they are the most compassionate people. So be careful when you use these words. So the tech men theoretically don't have bodhicitta yet, and they can't perceive real emptiness in a correct way. Did any of you study Mahamudra with me? Well, if you did, you'll begin to see that there are many connections between Trang and the 6 flavors of emptiness. So Rang Ke Tupe, Zeyu Dijupa. To exist as a self-standing, substantial thing. This term describes the version of ignorance which sees the subtle self nature of a person. This is like that 6-inch rabbit horn we were speaking of earlier. It represents the lowest form of selflessness and the easiest to perceive, according to the independent school. So this is what ignorance sees in this school as at its most unsophisticated level. So when it's looking at a person, it has a fantasy about that person. And isn't that something we do? We have fantasies. We tell ourselves stories about people, right? So to this group of people, selflessness is the absence of this self-standing, substantial thing. Ranke tupe dijupe. Dijupa, excuse me. The Ranki tupe all goes together, and it's an idiom. It means self-standing. That's an awkward say of saying it stands on its own. In modern colloquial Tibetan, they say Rango Tumbur, which is very similar to Ranki Tupe, and it means I moved out of my house. I'm standing on my own. I'm renting my own apartment. I'm an adult now, right? And Zeyu Dujupa means substantial. And this is an important word. There are like 5 meanings to it. Chankyaropa Dorje, he wrote a whole page on it, and it's in your reading. And he said, here's the 5 different meanings that substantial has in Buddhism. And remember, Geshe Michael and other students were getting this teaching from Geshe Thupten Rinchen. This is how the lineage is passed down. And Geshe Thupten Rinchen went through a very detailed description of the highest meaning. And then he said, there's these other ones. So your mind goes through 5 different ideas that are wrong before you get to the right one. And this is not just some physical fighting between the different schools. Each one of these was taught by Lord Buddha. Why? Because either you or one of your students is going to be thinking that exact thing, and you have to know them. We'll come back to that later. Somewhere in those 4.5 schools of wrong ideas about emptiness is exactly where you or one of your students are. As you get clearer and clearer by learning each wrong idea, right, your understanding of emptiness will grow stronger and stronger. And then you know that you should go up to the upper half of the 4th school, the Madhyamika, right? So what does Zeyu Dijupa mean in this case? And here's where the 6 flavors of emptiness kick in. That you're the director, you're the controller or the driver of your body and mind, which are supposedly separate from you, right? The independent school said, well, there must be something else than my body and my mind that's me. You believe that you are controlling, that you're driving this whole thing, this body and mind. By a you who is self-standing, isn't affected by cause and conditions, isn't affected by how you treat others, right? Stands by itself. No support from anything else. It's like, I'm not one of the parts of the car, I'm the driver. I exist independent of my body and my mind. I'm behind it directing the scene. Don't we believe that? Don't we believe we control what we think and what our body does? Have you ever experienced some thoughts that you're like, where did that come from? And we talk about my thoughts. Who's the my? If I have my thoughts, then therefore I'm not my thoughts. I can lift my arm up. Therefore, I am not my arm. I'm somewhere behind it all, looking at it all, and directing the whole show. Don't you believe that? I'm afraid I do. Which, when you get some disease, when you get cancer or something, it's very frustrating. Wait a minute. I'm not directing that. I can't control that. At some point in your life, you will realize that there is no such thing as an independent driver. You know, someone like the Wizard of Oz directing the show from behind the curtain. You are your body and mind or something, right? But you're not like a self-existent, self-standing, substantial driver who's directing the show. Can you tell me for sure that you will have the shirt that you're wearing today, tomorrow? Forget about your body. We don't even control our shirt. How can we control our body? So, what do they perceive when they see selflessness? Let's say they're on the path of seeing, lower track. Path number 3, realization number 3, the direct perception of selflessness. What do they see? When listeners perceive this emptiness directly, they directly perceive that there is no independent being running your body and mind. And then they're able to use this realization to stop their mental afflictions and reach nirvana. That's pretty cool, just from that realization. So that's on the third path. What about on the second path? The path of, what's the second path? Third path is path of seeing. Path of preparation, right? You're preparing to see emptiness. There's, on that level, at the second path, they're starting to get an intellectual understanding of why and what, it means that there's no self running the body and the mind. Path of preparation, they're preparing to understand that lack of a self-standing, independent whole running the body and mind. Then they have that realization. So after they have that realization, on the fourth path, which is the path of getting used to or habituation, They're using their direct perception of the fact that there's no driver of the body and the mind, back when they saw selflessness directly, to get rid of their mental afflictions. So they're just getting used to it, thinking about it over and over. And then the fifth path of no more learning, they achieve lower nirvana. And they think it's enlightenment. What is lower nirvana? They get rid of all of their negative thoughts, right? And the seeds for them. Not a bad place, but it's not an enlightened being. It's not full enlightenment. So it's all relating to their version of emptiness on that track, which is not true about, say, Gyelse. That there's this person running her mind and her body who's not part of her mind and her body. There's no self-standing person behind me running it. We do tend to think that there is, especially when we hear our thoughts. Right? The one who is listening to your thoughts. And then you think, well, if I'm listening to my thoughts, there must be a separate me from my thoughts. Listeners do believe that there is a self that exists. And this is the one who is listening to their thoughts. Gyelse is the consciousness of her thoughts. This is the self which exists according to the independent group. The highest school of Buddhism, the Madhyamika Prasangika, agrees that these disciples can see emptiness directly and can reach nirvana. But to do so, they have to see ultimate emptiness, as defined by the Madhyamika Prasangika, by the highest school, which in actuality is the only kind of emptiness there is. So the gross lack of a self nature of objects. We're growing up, right? We did the subtle, now we're talking about gross. Say Rangel. Rangel. Gyelwa means victor or Buddha. And these are what are called self-made Buddhas or pratyeka Buddhas or solitary realizers. Literally, the name means that they became a Buddha or an enlightened being without a teacher. Is that possible? No, it's totally impossible. You can't get anywhere in Buddhism without a completely qualified teacher. But the text clearly says they didn't have a teacher in this life. So there's an implication there, right? In this life. It implies that in the past, they had literally millions of teachers for millions of lifetimes. probably like us because we're here, right? They've been guided by totally qualified, enlightened spiritual teachers. Then, in the very last life, something can happen, and without formally taking a Lama in this life, they achieve Buddhahood. So this word self-made is also a misnomer, misnamed. They're not self-made and they're not Buddhas. But they have achieved lower nirvana. So a self-made Buddha is someone who has achieved a lower nirvana without a teacher in this life, right? All the scriptures say that. They also say the Buddha here means lower nirvana. Again, another code word. This track number 2 is Hinayana or Mahayana? Hinayana. Yeah. Yes, it's another Hinayana track. So the first 2 tracks are Hinayana. What kind of emptiness do they see? They see that it's not true, that there's a gross version of the self of things. Okay. Whew. We finished the 2 versions of selves, right? We had a gross version that didn't qualify. Then we had a subtle version with the lack of which is what the first track people saw. Now we're up to the obvious form of the lack of a self nature to things. Things are harder than people to perceive in this school. Sukdang suksen gitseme, zeishengi tongpa. This is like a mantra. I can remember when we were studying this, we would go around saying this, right? You can impress Ben and Kendra with this phrase, right? Sukdang suksen gitsema. That means valid perception. What is an invalid perception? A tsemin. When I lived at Diamond Mountain, I can remember in the fall driving between Diamond Mountain and the town of Bowie. At night or sometimes around dusk. And you go through these orchards, pistachio orchards. And in the fall, they lose all their leaves, right? And you're driving, and all of a sudden you see some of these leaves blowing across the road. And you think it's a mouse. And you slam on your brakes because you don't want to kill it, right? That split second of misperception is a semen. They're rare during your day. We don't have a lot of them. Do we have a lot of wrong perceptions? Yeah, probably every second, right? But they're valid misperceptions. And there's a big difference. A real semen, non-sema, non-valid perception is pretty rare. Like you have to have a totally wrong idea. If somebody is trying to help you and you perceive them as trying to hurt you or something, but they're really preparing a secret birthday party for you and you think they're sneaking around the house trying to steal your money or something. That would be a simon. We don't have those very often, right? Sukdang, Sukzin, Gitsema, Deishin, Gitongpa this time. Physical matter and the mind that validly perceives it are devoid of coming from separate substances. This is the gross lack of a self nature of objects still, right? That valid perception, which is holding on to that object, which is perceiving that object me. My I consciousness, which is perceiving the pen, and the pen, which is being perceived by my I consciousness. Is this starting to sound familiar? These two things, mind and matter, don't come from different karmic seeds. This means that the karma that causes the objects and situations in my world, in your world, and the karma that causes our misperception, our perception, of those things are the same seed. My awareness of the pen and the pen itself, Zei Shin Gi Dongpa, means they are void or devoid, right? There's a tongpa there at the end, so be careful. It doesn't mean emptiness here. It means void. They are devoid or they don't have Zei Shin, right? Separate seeds. Last class, what does that mean that this pen is my mind? Or that it's made of my mind, different substances? Does that mean that this pen is my mind? We talked about mind-only school, right? What does it mean? Does it mean it comes from my mind? No. Different substance is another code word here for different seed. They came, they come, they are from the same cause. Me being here, perceiving the pen, and the pen being here. They are devoid of different causes, meaning they come from the same seed. The fact that objects and your perception of them don't come from different karmic seeds is a kind of emptiness. And it is harder to see than the listener's subtle lack of a self nature of persons. So, excuse me. When these disciples realize selflessness, they are seeing the obvious form of the lack of a self nature to objects. Remember, objects means parts of a person. This is second level emptiness in this school, and it's pretty hard to see. Meaning that it's harder to see than the thing about Gyelse driving her body and mind. That's pretty easy, right? Like I can't control this phlegm in my throat. That's pretty easy. But if you took 100 random people and sat them down to explain that there's no real substantial being behind their body and mind, who is not their body and mind, who is running them, who would understand the stuff about one karmic seed? So this kind of emptiness or selflessness is harder to understand. This is the lack of a self nature to things. And remember, this is number 2 of 3. So it's a little bit easier to see because we're going to get to the harder one later. This is the second level of selflessness. According to the mind-only school, this is the highest form of emptiness. Independent school, it's the second level. So far we've covered 2 levels and 3 self-natures, or 2 tracks. The first self-nature that's lacked didn't make it, right? Because it was too obvious. It's not believed by the first track. Out of the 4 kinds of self-nature we've talked about, the first one doesn't even make it into being denied by any of the tracks. That's the one where you had a soul, right? So we just talked about gross lack of a self-nature. Now we're going to talk about the subtle lack. And we're on to the 3rd track of students, right? Say Gyelse. Gyelse. Zhang is short for Zhangchub. And Sem is short for Sempa, meaning mind. The mind of a Buddha, which translates into Bodhisattva. Sometimes they call the 3rd track Tekchen. Which means, let's see, greater way, Mahayana. Sometimes they call it Bodhisattva track. Same thing, okay? So what do you see when you get there? What version of emptiness? What version of selflessness? What version of shunyata, Tongpa do you see? You see ultimate emptiness, which is the same as Tongni, okay? Tongni and Tongpa mean the same thing. And we're going to get a description of what that is, what it means. It's the subtle version of the lack of a self to the parts of a person, or what we call objects, remember? So this is the 3rd degree of selflessness, the highest form of selflessness, the subtle lack of a self-nature to things. Chö tamche dempa tongpa. Chö tamche means everything in the universe. Dempa means true existence, real, right? Dempa tongpa means void, means it doesn't have that. So in normal English, we would say no existing object in the universe has any real or ultimate existence. So what does it mean in the independent school for something to exist truly? What is the gotcha in this school? We've had 3 different flavors. We said, maybe it's a self of a person where you are driving this person in mind around, right? That's the lowest one. And that's not real emptiness. Or maybe it's the lack of being a separate karmic seed to you and the things around you. The fact that it's not true that you've come from a separate karma, you and the things around you. But then they went and said, that's not real emptiness in this school. So what is real emptiness? Oh, the fact that nothing is real. Okay, but what do you mean when you say that? You don't just accept that they say nothing is real. You have to go that extra step, right? And if you don't understand this school. You could go around all day saying nothing's real. Oh, great. What do you mean? Does that mean I can go stand out in front of a taxi cab and see if it breaks my legs? So what does it mean in this school? So it's really beautiful. It is the emptiness that bridges between the mind-only school and the Prasangika school. If you understand this kind of emptiness, you understand all the wrong ideas about emptiness. You got the Abhidharma version of the wrong idea of emptiness. Then you got the Sutrist version of the wrong idea about emptiness. Now you got the mind-only version's wrong idea about emptiness. Right? This is how many, many great teachers have taught in this way. Like the first Panchen Lama. Like he spent a beautiful book that we have been studying recently, telling what emptiness is not. What book is that the first Panchen Lama wrote that we've been studying? It's the angel and devil, right? The angel defeats the devil. So the practitioners on this 3rd track, those of the Bodhisattva track who belong to the higher vehicle or way, come to see real emptiness. Or the fact that every existing object is empty of any true existence. This is the 3rd degree of selflessness, the subtle lack of a self to things. I don't know if we're going to finish class today. We're going to go until the hour. We're not stopping here. So lo nu me lanangwe wangi shakpa ma, or shakpa, ma yimpar, yul rangi tungmo ma yimpe, duluki nune jupa. Again, this is another mantra in the monastery. If there could be a thing that could exist from its own side, through its own unique identity, without being simply established as existing by virtue of its appearing to an unaffected state of mind, that would be something that truly existed. This one sentence tells you what they think. how they think things really do exist and how they think things don't exist. The first being dependent events, and the second being emptiness. How things really do exist and how they don't. So first they tell you what it really is. According to their school, the way things really do exist, right? And then they negate that, right? And that's going to be the way they don't exist. So it's the flip side of the same coin, dependent events, and emptiness. So lo nume, lo means state of mind, and nume means unaffected, not messed up. By what? Drugs, alcohol, extreme jealousy, where you think things are going on when they're not. Extreme illness, mental illness, right? We're talking about short-term problems. Strong negative thoughts or not feeling well. When these occur, things look different to us. So nume means normal state of mind, unaffected, right? Nangwe wangi means it's appearing to a normal state of mind. Nangwe means appearing. That object, back to the pen, it's appearing a certain way to a normal state of mind. And wangi, by virtue of that, shakpa, we can say it exists. It's just the simple existence of the pen, appearing to an unaffected state of mind. So how do you know this pen is here? Because I can establish it as existing by virtue of its having appeared to an unaffected state of mind. Right? It does exist in that way. If the pen appears to an unaffected state of mind, then that pen exists. Right? By virtue of that, therefore, we establish it as existing. That's all. It's very simple. How do we describe the existence of things in the independent school? If my mind's not messed up, and if I see it, if it appears to me, then it exists. This is the gotcha in this school. If a pen appears to an undistorted state of mind, it can be said to exist. Two things have to be present. It has to be appearing from its own side as a pen, and I have to be perceiving it as a pen with a clear state of mind. Right? What about in the Prasangika, the most subtle school? They would say it's a projection. Here we're talking, it's doing its part, the pen is doing its part, and I'm doing my part. There has to be an appearance from its side, and there has to be an unaffected state of mind looking at it. And then somewhere in the middle, we have pen. Due to a cooperative effort between both of us, me and the pen. In this school, an object exists truly when it exists from its own side through some unique identity of its own, rather than simply being established as existing by having appeared to an unaffected state of mind. Objects like this don't exist. And this is the ultimate meaning of emptiness. I'll say that again. In this school, an object exists truly when it exists from its own side through some unique identity of its own. Rather than simply being established by existing by having appeared to an unaffected state of mind. Objects like this don't exist, and this is the ultimate meaning of emptiness. So there's the metaphor of a magic trick, which is used to explain this view of emptiness according to the middle way independent school. Right? Do you guys remember this story? Some of you probably do. I don't know if all of you do. A magician sprinkles powder on the audience, says some mantras. He has a stick, he throws it down on the ground. A stick that they saw a minute ago now appears to them as a horse. And then a latecomer, someone who wasn't there when he scattered the magic powder and said the magic words, comes and looks on. And all they don't see a horse. They just see a stick. The magician sees a horse, but he knows it's really a stick. The magician represents a person who has just seen emptiness directly, but comes out of that direct perception and still sees things as self-existent. They know they're wrong and that they aren't really empty. And then there's the people in the original crowd who had the dust scattered on them and heard the mantra, who see a horse and think it's a horse. These people represent someone who hasn't seen emptiness directly yet, who still sees things as self-existent and believe things to be self-existent. The latecomer doesn't see a horse and doesn't believe there's a horse. The latecomer represents a person on the 8th bodhisattva level or higher, to whom things don't even appear as self-existent, because they've been working on their own mind and their understanding of emptiness. This middle way independent school is a beautiful bridge or transition to take you from the mind-only school's view that Shenwangs do exist from their own side through their own unique way of being, to the middle way independent school saying that's crazy. You've got to have the mind seeing it that way and it appearing that way. When they meet together, the object and the being perceiving it, then you have an object. Then the middle way consequence school of Arya Nagarjuna, Jason Kappa, Ken Rinpoche, Geshe Michael say that there is nothing out there that has any nature of being pen from its own side. It's nothing more than a karmic object. There's just a cylinder. There's nothing saying pen from its side. There's a cylinder that could suggest pen, but then you're laying pen on it. And that's all that existence is. To the independent school, objects do exist from their own side, but not uniquely. Because to exist, they require that your mind thinks of them. So you're halfway between mind-only school and the consequence school, the prasangika school. Prasangika, we say they have the ultimate truth. They're saying it's just your karmic projection on a cylinder. There's nothing from its side that is saying a pen. Mind-only school, they say that's a pen from its own side and it has its own unique penness, which is what you think when you get mad at somebody. Somewhere in the middle is Madhyamika Independent School. If you get this clear, you will be thinking about emptiness beautifully. Your idea of emptiness will be very, very clear. So Lord Buddha set up this graded series of explanations of emptiness, so people can progress in their understanding up to the highest view, which is the ultimate explanation of emptiness. It's held by the Middle Way Consequence School, right? The highest school. They believe that there is a basis on which the pen rests, like the cylinder onto which you project your image of a pen. But the cylinder doesn't have a nature of being a pen. And if you don't look any further, matak machepar, that's okay, right? There's a cylinder that I am placing pen onto. But if you want to discuss the emptiness of the cylinder, you will see that there is no cylinder from its own side, and it is merely placed onto the basis of the parts of the cylinder. So understanding all these views, most of which are incorrect, will help you to know where you're at and where your students are at, and to be able to explain emptiness to them at their level of capacity. Many ideas floating around in the world today don't even qualify as being lowest Buddhist explanations of emptiness. Like, emptiness means that everything is changing, and we have to adapt to change. It's true, everything's changing, but that's not emptiness. So Madhyamika Svatantrika, the independent school, is if there could be a thing that could exist from its own side, with its own unique identity, without simply being established as existing by virtue of its appearing to an unaffected state of mind. So the three scopes, the Kebusum. It's easy to confuse the idea of persons of three scopes. In the teachings on the steps of the path to enlightenment, Lamrim, right? There's this idea of the three tracks mentioned above, the three scopes. Who are the persons of the three scopes? The first level are people who want to avoid the three lower realms only for their own sake. The second scope, this is like ability, spiritual ability, right? People who want to avoid all three realms in the circle of suffering. They don't want to suffer. And they want to get to their own nirvana. And then the third scope are people who want to avoid the three lower realms and avoid all three realms, all three suffering realms, and reach total enlightenment so they can help other beings reach that same enlightenment. And how do they do that? Through the three vehicles. We did talk about these. We're just going to go over them again, tek pasum, because it's on your homework. So there are two ways to think about the term three vehicles. The first one is listeners, self-made Buddhas, and bodhisattvas. The listeners follow things like the four Arya truths. Self-made Buddhas focus on the 12 links of the wheel of life. And bodhisattva focus on the perfection of wisdom. And then there's the listener track. They hope to reach nirvana on this track, and who, according to the independent school, can see only up to the subtle lack of a self nature to the person. Okay, that's the listeners. Those of the self-made Buddha track, they hope to reach nirvana of this track and who can see only up to the gross lack of a self nature to things. Those of the Bodhisattva or Mahayana track, they hope to reach total enlightenment for the sake of all beings and who can see real emptiness. And then there are three ways, which are actually the Tekmin, which is up there already, Hinayana, or Mahayana, Tekchen, with Diamond Way being a subset. There we go, of Mahayana. Right? That word tek or tekpa that we talked about, as I said, it means vehicle or way. It means your capacity. Like the amount of weight that a pillar in a building can support. So it's referring to whether or not you can carry a load of taking care of many other people as well as yourself. So Tekmin, lower way Hinayana, philosophically, they don't understand emptiness according to mind only or the middle way presentations. Motivationally, they don't have bodhicitta. And then Tekchen, philosophically, they have a mind only or middle way understanding of emptiness. And motivationally, they have the capacity and desire to take care of infinite number of sentient beings. And then there's Dorji Tegpa, the Diamond Way, Vajrayana, secret Mahayana practice. It is a common misconception that Vajrayana is a separate way from Mahayana. And the definitions of these two are on the next slide. But by the way, Lama Tsongkhapa notes in the great book on the steps to enlightenment, the Lomrim Chemo, that those on the first two tracks are both people of the second and medium scopes. Okay, these two. So, Bodhisattva track, Parchangi Tempo, Tekpa Chempo, the Mahayana of the six perfections. This is a code name given to the open teachings. And it is only a code name because Tantra also totally requires, the practice of the six perfections. And we have that practice of the six perfections if you have taken your bodhisattva vows. You practice them in keeping your 6 times book, reviewing those vows. They are focused on the six perfections. And then Sangnaki Tekpa Chempo means the Mahayana teachings of the secret words or mantra. And this is Diamond Way. So that is the definition there. And we're going to skip homework question 7 because we don't have enough time to do it in this class. We will add it on to the next class, class 10. So don't worry about it when you do your homework. And that was quite the horse race to get through all of that material today, right? So thank you. I apologize if I was going too fast. I was looking at the clock and knowing I didn't have a lot of time. But I really wanted to make sure that I was explaining it clearly, and I hope that I did that. So your meditation assignment, that was class 7. We're not doing it. Your meditation assignment is to do a 15-minute analytical meditation per day. You know the pattern that we do here. 15 minutes every day. Going through the 3 supposed degrees of selflessness and mentally trying to appreciate why the independent group would teach them. So that means you're going to have to review, if you didn't take notes, what the supposed 3 degrees of selflessness are, so that you can then go over them in your meditation. Right? So you've got a little bit of work cut out for you. If you do the homework, I think it will help you. Right? And if not, we're going to cover it again in the next class. So don't worry. Let's take a big breath, a stretch. We've been sitting here for a long time. You guys are amazing hanging in here. And remember why we're doing this, to create this exquisite, beautiful world where every being is free and safe and has everything they need. Where they all live is beautiful, filling their needs, right? This is what we're working towards. Sashi Puki Jukshing Metok Drum Ri Rab Ling Shin Yende Genpadi Sangye Shingdu Mikte Uwargi Jokun Namdak Shingla Chiparsho Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniryatayami Gewadi Kewokun Sunam Yashe Sok Shing Sunam Yashe Lejungwe Dampar Kuni Topar Sho. So thank you again for hanging in there. Let me put you on gallery view so I can see a few more faces. There's Anna, who I didn't see earlier, and a bunch of people without their cameras on. Thank you for coming to class. Thank you for hanging in there. Here we are on class 9. And I'm sorry I'm not getting the PPTs to the interpreters quickly. It takes a lot of work, and having been at Diamond Mountain for almost 2 weeks kind of put me behind, and I am working hard, and it takes many hours to put these PPTs together and be able to teach it to you in a digestible way.
Thank
So
you so much. Thank you
let me
for all
finish
your hard
talking.
work.
Let me finish. Don't interrupt me. So I just want to thank you for hanging in there. Thank you to all the tech. Thank you to all the interpreters. I know that this isn't easy, and you just keep coming back. So thank you, and we'll figure this stuff out together. Figure out where we are on the ladder. Are we going over that bridge or not going over that bridge to the Diamond Way? Right? So thank you. Now, Kadrin, now you can not interrupt me.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry for interruption. Thank you so much for all your hard work. It's really, I just think how hard it is to take all this material and create all these classes. Thank you, Venerable Gyelse. It's amazing. Thank you for all your hard work and teaching us this super hard material, which you present kind of clear. I can say that it's easy, but it becomes clear when we go through that with you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Venerable Gyelse. Thank you.
I want to
All
say
the
one more thing, which is, of course, I could never be doing this without Geshe Michael having presented this material 30 years ago or something like that. I don't remember the year at this point. I think it was probably like 1990, 96 or 7, something like that, 30 years ago, right? We couldn't do it. And I definitely couldn't do it without all of the notes that we have and transcripts and tapes so that I can review the material to pass it on. So all of my gratitude to Holy Lama Geshe Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Geshe Michael. Thank you, all the teachers who learned from him and who is able now to uh, give these teachings to all of us, next generation. Thank you so much, the first generation. And we are kind of your children because you are children of Geshe Michael. Thank you so much. And in the chat, you can find information regarding a retreat with Venerable Gyelse. You can go to the website and read more about that. And you can listen, even listen to the class Venerable Gyelse taught about this practice in Russian, English, Spanish, Ukrainian, and Vietnamese language. So you can listen, watch the recording of this class. And just if you're interested in what it is and maybe consider if you want it or not, you can go and have a look on this information, this recording. Thank you
And
so
see
much.
you in a couple of days.
Yeah, and see you next Thursday is going to be our class 10. Is Gyelse, Venerable Gyelse, is it going to be class 11?
I do not have time to do a class 11 with you. If you guys want to organize a review, then please do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So next class is the last one. Please come back on Thursday. Thank you. Do your homeworks. Join the study groups. Thank you so much. Thank you, Venerable Gyelse. Thank you, everyone.